Have you ever been speaking French and then halfway through you realize you don't know how to finish the sentence because the English sentence that you're translating in your head ends in a preposition, and you know or you've heard that in French you can't end a sentence in a preposition? Oui, c'est le film que je parle. How do I add the about here? Oui, moi aussi. And that's exactly what we're going to cover in today's video to make you more confident with your French sentences. Allez, c'est parti. Salut French learner, my name is Alex and I'm a French coach for English speakers who have been learning French for a while and want to know how to kick on, make progress and become confident French speakers. If you're new to the channel, please do hit that subscribe button and click on the bell notification icon so that you never miss a single video that I release every single week. So is it true that you can't end a sentence in French in a preposition? Yes, technically it's not allowed. What even is a preposition? Prepositions are those little words that link two clauses or parts of a sentence together. In English, some are to, from, on, under, against, by, etc. You get the picture. In French, some are à, de, avec, sans, contre, par. Do we really end sentences a lot in English with a preposition? Yes, just think about it. We do it all the time. The film I'm talking about, the queue I'm in, the person you're speaking to, the team he works with. All of these sentences end in a preposition. Now, if you try and translate these word for word in French and follow the rule of not putting a preposition at the end, you're going to be blocked. Let's have a look at them just for sake of argument and for sake of clarity in French, if you try to do that. Cue the stress, right? Le film, je parle. La queue, je suis. La personne, tu parles. L'équipe, y travaille. Notice that I put que and qui in brackets in those examples, and that's because in English they're equivalents of who and that, or that and who, are optional. But in French they're actually mandatory. So although some of you who use that and who regularly in English will find it easy to swap that out for que and qui in French, many of us choose the shorter option, so we forget to put que and qui in when we're using the French equivalents. So first of all, I'd recommend you getting very comfortable with knowing when to use that or who in English because it's optional for us, because knowing those cases will get you very far in French, seeing as their uses of their equivalents que and qui are mandatory. I think he's crazy. I think that he's crazy. Je pense qu'il est fou. Je pense qu'il est fou. The food I smell. The food that I smell. La nourriture que je sens. La nourriture que je sens. The girl I like. The girl that I like. La fille que j'aime bien. La fille que j'aime bien. Or la fille qui me plaît. La fille qui me plaît, to give it a more natural French structure. You see, once you see where it's optional in English, you'll see where it's mandatory in French. And that will give you a really, really good grounding. And I hope these examples cleared up for you if it wasn't clear already. I won't go much deeper into que and qui because it's outside the scope of today's video, and I think there's a ton of great content out there on the internet already, so go and have a search. But what I will say is that que is always followed by a new subject, like je, tu, il, elle, etc. And qui replaces a subject, so you follow it with either a pronoun for an object or a conjugation. In the more simple sentences, it'll be a conjugation. But if you feel that those other content sources do not teach it adequately, do let me know down in the comments below and I'll add it to the list of video ideas. So that's level 1 in a nutshell, showing you how to link two clauses or parts of a sentence using what we call relative pronouns. And we've looked at que and qui, which are the most simple. Now I know we haven't yet talked about prepositions, and that's what I said this video was all about, but that's very intentional because to understand the more complex cases of relative pronouns which involve prepositions, it's important to understand the relative pronouns which do not involve prepositions first of all. Alors, so far we've seen that que is the most simple way to link two clauses in a French sentence, and I said that que typically translates to that in English. Well, that or this is still true, but you can only use que if the verb that precedes it does not require a preposition. Of course, I'm going to illustrate this with an example. In the English example, to have a point of view, the verb to have is not followed by a preposition. It's immediately followed by the object of the sentence, which is a point of view. Luckily, and that's a key word here, the French form of this sentence follows exactly the same structure, so it's easy for us English speakers to understand it. It's avoir un point de vue. Avoir un point de vue. So when we flip things around in the sentence and I say, the point of view that I have, in English we can also say, the point of view I have, right? But in French you can't omit the que, which is the equivalent of that. So you have to say, le point de vue que j'ai. And we can use que because avoir, the verb to have in the sentence, is not required to be followed by a preposition, right? That's how you know you can use que. All good. And like I say, this works with any verb that doesn't require a preposition. And thankfully, a lot of French verbs follow the same logic, the same grammatical rule as its English equivalent. So it's even easier for us English speakers to get our heads around, such as to eat something. Manger quelque chose. For example, la nourriture que je mange. La nourriture que je mange. Drink something. To drink something. Boire quelque chose. Boire quelque chose. Le vin que je bois. Le vin que je bois. Now you use que because, that's right, the verb does not require a preposition. And a final example, to love someone, is aimer quelqu'un. Aimer quelqu'un. L'homme que j'aime. L'homme que j'aime. Alors, on est bon jusqu'ici? Allez, avançons au niveau 2. Okay, so I hope you've been paying attention up until now because things are going to start to get a little bit more tricky, but I'm going to ease you into it, don't worry. So, unfortunately or fortunately, a lot of verbs require prepositions. But the fortunate side of English and French being so close is that a lot of our verbs in English follow the same structure with French. Just like we saw with the ones which don't require a preposition, there are lots which do require a preposition that also require a preposition in French. So that helps us again to understand it more quickly and then use the French equivalents. For example, to speak to someone. To here, between speak and someone, is a preposition. It's required in English. Same in French, you have parler à quelqu'un. Parler à quelqu'un. Another example, to put something on something. On here is required if you want to talk about this specific action. In French, it's the same. Mettre quelque chose sur quelque chose. And lastly, to fight against something is lutter contre quelque chose. Lutter contre quelque chose. Let's take that second example and go further. To put something on something. In English, when a verb requires a preposition and we rearrange things, we can end the sentence in that preposition, which we've already said you can't do in French. So let's have a look at that. You can say, I put the mug on the table, right? And then you can rearrange it to say, the table that the mug is on, or the table the mug is on. It ends in on, which you know isn't possible in French because I've already said it 100 times during the video. But just to illustrate, let's use our word-for-word logic again and see where it gets us. So the table that the mug is on, la table que la tasse est sur. No, you can't do that. You can't end it in sur because sur is a preposition. So how do we solve this? Well, what I'm about to say is hopefully going to make things more palatable for you as an English speaker because this is the logic that I found and I have used to make it much more palatable for me, and that therefore make it easier for me to continue with this level of difficulty and beyond. And it's also where the fact that our two languages have such a shared history comes in handy for us. Even though it's become the norm to end sentences in prepositions in English, we can still say, albeit more formally, things like on which, of which, against which, to which, from which, right? And it still makes sense, or at least I hope it makes sense to you as an English speaker. So instead of separating the that and the on like we do when we want to end the sentence in the more modern way, let's say, this keeps it together. On which. It's all in one place. And this you should keep in mind because what I'm about to tell you was a game changer for me for my French going forward. To see this in action, let's stick with our last example, the table I put the mug on, or the table that I put the mug on. We can change this to the table on which I put the mug. Great. Completely valid English sentence, but no preposition at the end, which satisfies our criteria for a French sentence. This is a little look into the inner workings of my mind here, but I look to see if there's any common logic between English and French that I can use, and that makes it far more comfortable for me going forward, and I highly recommend that you do the same. Introducing lequel, laquelle, lesquels, et lesquels. Think of these as the equivalent of the which in on which, for which, from which, etc. in English. And then using the process of elimination, we can see the one that we want in French would be sur lequel, because sur is on, and I said that lequel is the which, right? Can we make a correct French sentence now? La table sur laquelle j'ai mis la tasse. La table sur laquelle j'ai mis la tasse. Much better. Beaucoup, beaucoup mieux. All that remains now is to get the gender right, because as you saw, there's lequel, laquelle, lesquels, et lesquels for one English word of which. Well, yeah, we do have to deal with gender and plurality here in French. So you have to see lequel is for singular masculine nouns, laquelle for singular feminine, lesquels with one L, S is for plural masculine nouns, and lesquels with double L-E-S is for plural feminine nouns. But it's not the end of the world if you pronounce them incorrectly. You're already creating a much, much stronger, much more grammatically correct French sentence by just saying sur lequel. But to be correct, because it's only one tiny little step further, you would say la table sur laquelle j'ai mis la tasse. La table sur laquelle j'ai mis la tasse. Or perhaps it's j'ai mise because it's feminine table and we have to agree it, but that's a bit more advanced and I'll allow some natives to correct me in the comments. So yes, the correct structure of the sentence is la table sur laquelle j'ai mis la tasse. And hopefully you can be comfortable with it because this follows the same structure as a valid English phrase, albeit one that maybe you're less used to using. And to those who say, well, you shouldn't use translation, I say, perhaps. But in some cases, if English gives you a connection with the French language that can help you level up and go further, I say, why the hell shouldn't you use it? And with prepositions like sur, avec, par, contre, sous, and others, you can do the same thing by combining it with lequel or laquelle, or the correct one for number and gender. For example, you have sur lequel, par lequel, sous lequel, contre lequel, avec lequel, etc. Now with other prepositions, this does get more complicated, but I think that's outside of the scope of this video. I'm trying to show you the English logic that I use to figure this stuff out. So hopefully you can use that to figure out things like auquel and à laquelle and duquel. If not, but please do try first. If not, you can't figure it out, do again let me know down in the comments that you would love to see that as a video topic and I would be happy to make one. Okay, so just before level 3, let me talk to you about level 2.2 or something like that. So far we've talked about things using which in English and getting that to being lequel or laquelle. But that doesn't work for people. So if it's about a person in French, you're going to need to think about it in English as to whom, or from whom, or with whom. And so in these cases, you don't combine it with lequel, you combine it with qui, right? Which means both who and whom in English. So it uses the same logic we've just covered. To whom is à qui, and it goes together. just to give you two brief examples, one would be il faut trouver un coach avec qui tu te sens à l'aise. And c'est le caissier à ou avec qui tu parlais. So that's level 2. So when you're translating your sentences from English to French, think about it in a more formal, old school English of which, for which, with which, on which, and you'll be much closer to figuring out a valid French sentence. It makes a lot more sense to me, and I hope it does for you too. Okay, on to level 3, which is naturally a bit more difficult than level 2, but it employs a lot of the same logic. That's why all of these levels are not mutually exclusive. You have to follow them 1 through 4. Right, so level 3 is all about my arch nemesis in French, which is donc. And it still uses that same English logic of thinking about things as of which, on which, with which, etc. But it's specifically related to verbs which use the preposition de in French, right? If you need to take a sentence with the French preposition de and rearrange it so that you have to use a relative pronoun, like we talked about so far, which is qui, que, sur lequel, sur laquelle, etc., you're going to need the relative pronoun donc, which looks like don't in English, except doesn't have the apostrophe. And so I call it level 3, not just because donc is my arch nemesis, but because in level 2 we saw that we could think of things like of which. With 2 words in English, we find that there's 2 word equivalents in French, right? Or with donc it's different because even if I tell you to think about it as about which or of which or from which, because it can translate to those things, it gets all packaged up into one word, donc, right? So it can be harder to retain and easier to forget. That's at least what I found in my experience. So remember that example we saw right at the beginning of the video, which was the film that I'm talking about, right? The film that I'm talking about, it ends in a preposition about, so it wouldn't work with que. Oui, c'est le film que je parle. How do I add the about here? Right, because in French, parler requires de, just like speak requires about. Yeah, so that's at least easy to understand. But of course, now you know, I've told you it requires a preposition, so you can't use que. Good, great logic. So I'm here to tell you that when it uses de, you need to use the pronoun donc, okay? So that's the film I'm talking about, or that's the film that I'm talking about. In English would be c'est le film dont je parle. C'est le film dont je parle. And as you can see, in English, it would translate best to about which, because those go together in the middle and you can't separate them, but they get packaged together into this one small four-letter word in French. I feel like if you've already been learning French for a significant amount of time, doesn't have to be that long, but just a significant amount of time, you would have recognized that you can't say c'est le film que je parle de. You'd be like, no, there's something weird about that. I've never seen or heard a sentence end in de, right? But you wouldn't necessarily know how to go about fixing it. Well, donc here is our special magic word. So that's it for level 3. And just remember that with something like parler de, it maps directly to the English speak about. So again, it has a one-to-one equivalent with English, so it's easily palatable, but it's in its own level because instead of packaging it into 2 neat words like sur lequel, it puts it into one word, donc, which differs from English. And the last and the most tricky level, but hopefully a lot more manageable for you now if you've been following me closely and I've been clear enough in the 3 preceding levels, is what happens then when you have English and French which differ in their grammar. So remember earlier we talked about how lucky it is when verbs in English follow the same grammatical structure in French. That's handy, right? But they are 2 separate languages at the end of the day. We can't rely on them always being the same, but this does make it trickier for us, but not impossible to get your head around and to start using. So there are certain verbs in French which use de. And in English, we have trouble with this because we tend to like to think, okay, de always means of, or de always means from. But then you look at it, it'd be like, well, it doesn't make sense because in English, I wouldn't use from or of there. You just have to accept it and you just have to memorize it as it is. So if a verb goes with de, just remember that the verb goes with de, right? So for example, se souvenir de, to remember. In English, there's no preposition. It's just to remember something, right? So you'd think, oh, I'm going to use que. No, because in French it's se souvenir de. So you have to, je me souviens des vacances, right? I remember the holidays. Or I remember my holidays, de mes vacances, right? So in French you need to use that. So 3 other typical examples from everyday French would be avoir besoin de. Avoir besoin de. I'm sure you've all seen this, to need something, right? It requires de in French and we don't need that in English. There's also avoir envie de. Avoir envie de, which is a way to say I feel like something or I want something. Again, uses de in French. And there's also one of my favorites because it's particularly French and it's se rendre compte de. Se rendre compte de, which means to realize. It's more common to say se rendre compte de than to say réaliser in French, but I'm pretty sure réaliser works as well. So you know now that you will need dont as the relative pronoun if you change the structure of the sentence so that the object goes first. Now, if that's a bit confusing, let's have a look at some simple examples where we go from a normal, what we call active sentence, where we have the subject followed by the object, and we're going to flip them to the object being first, which will require us to use dont as the relative pronoun. So the first example is j'ai besoin d'une vidéo sur la grammaire française. J'ai besoin d'une vidéo sur la grammaire française. Now, de here is de apostrophe, une because it's a vowel afterwards, but it's still avoir besoin de. Now, if you want to flip that and use the object of the sentence, which is une vidéo, right? In English, we're going to say the video I need is on French grammar, is on the French grammar, right? So in French, you're going to have to say la vidéo dont j'ai besoin est sur la grammaire française, right? Hopefully you get the logic by now, but it's particularly tricky and it's in level 4 because avoir besoin de and these other examples use de in French when their English equivalents do not use them. Right, the second example. Il fait chaud, j'ai envie d'une glace. Il fait chaud, j'ai envie d'une glace. If we flip this around, we get something like quand il fait chaud, le snack dont j'ai envie est une glace. Le snack dont j'ai envie est une glace. An example with se souvenir de would be je me souviens des magnifiques vacances en France. Again, when we flip that around, you can say les vacances dont je me souviens étaient magnifiques. Les vacances dont je me souviens étaient magnifiques. And to round this off, an example with se rendre compte de or to realize. That would be je me rends compte de toutes les erreurs en français que j'ai commises. Je me rends compte de toutes les erreurs en français que j'ai commises. So when we flip things around to put the errors, which is the object, at the beginning of the sentence, we get something like toutes les erreurs dont je me rends compte n'étaient pas graves. Toutes les erreurs dont je me rends compte n'étaient pas graves. Whew, that's a lot of French logic to go through in one video. I hope you're still with me. I hope you're still, well, the fact that you're watching tells me that you are, so thank you very much for sticking with me till the end. I hope seeing how I use English logic to make French grammar make as much sense as possible, even though they're two separate languages, has helped you understand the more simple examples all the way through to the more complex ones, because that's exactly how I do it myself. Now, are you struggling with speaking French with confidence? Do you feel like it could be tied to the grammar or another reason? Well, then my one-on-one coaching might be for you. Click on the link down in the description to read all about my processes, how I work, why I work the way I do, and book your free consultation call so we can go through your needs and your goals to see if coaching could be useful for you. But I think that about wraps it up for this video, everyone. If you are new here, please do subscribe to the channel by clicking on the big red subscribe button just down below. Smash that like button. It really does help me get this video out in front of more French learners like yourself who might need to watch it. But until next time, everyone, merci beaucoup d'avoir regardé. À la prochaine. Ciao.